Are pretty up to speed on what's happened with Genius. Talk about your path forward on the market structure bill called Clarity. How did you put that together? How did it come together with having so much Democratic support? And where is it in the Senate?
It's building on a lot of the work that we did last Congress. And so then it was Chairman Patrick McHenry working with French Hill, who is the subcommittee chair where I now sit. And the House actually got to work just in a very different political environment. So a lot of those negotiations and that work was under an era where President Biden was in office and Gary Gensler was the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And Chairman Gensler was effectively driving forward policy through enforcement actions in my view, in an incredibly unproductive way. Elections have consequences. We won the election. Chairman French Hill becomes Chairman French Hill. And we then get to work again and say, okay, under a new political framework that we have, now we have a friend of digital assets in the White House with President Trump. We have Republican control in the Senate, meaning if we move this bill, the Senate can actually bring it up. Chuck Schumer is preventing that previously. And then in the House, we think we have an opportunity. The pushback that you see on the left is real, right? I mean, you feel that in D.C. all the time. We're coming into a shutdown. We're going to have a 5-hour discussion about that, with the lapse in funding at the end of next week. And so the partisan divide is real, but there's also a recognition that the underlying principles of this really shouldn't be partisan in nature, that they're really just saying, here are the rules of the road, and now allow the free market to go and operate inside of these rules of the road. And we've had some good partners on both sides of the aisle that have been willing to engage in that, and we had 70 votes in favor of Fit 21, newly named Clarity comes in, and we built on that. We got 78 votes. Now it sits over the United States Senate. Again, the shenanigans that we have with these, the potential lapse in funding could gum up the works for a few days. But the hope is that the Senate is currently scheduled to have hearings followed by a markup in the coming week. And I've had a lot of conversations with our colleagues on the Senate side, on both sides of the aisle, saying utilize Clarity as base text. Because a lot of the landing pads that we have in Clarity were determined because of where the stakeholders were. And so if it was just unilateral, Bryan Steil wrote the bill, it would have looked different. Just Mike Flood wrote the bill, it would look a little bit different. But a lot of this was the political reality of where we could garner overwhelming support. And I think what we're watching in the Senate is the Republicans put out text and the Democrats have put out their principles, is I think what we'll actually see is those landing pads come actually really close to where Clarity currently is, with the need to make sure that we get this done and that we don't pull defeat from the jaws of victory, because we are in a position to move this all the way across the line. I think it'll be transformative for the United States to truly maintain dominance, but to really be a leader in the digital asset space going forward.
And all this despite the fact that the biggest event each day in the Senate is they get served Jell-O at 3:30. And then they watch Gunsmoke at 5.
That 2 p.m.
I've only been in the House for 3 years, but
that 2 p.m. nap that Facebook knows.
Yeah,
they think you're in the Senate.
Yeah. Well, so we get Clarity passed, and I know you in your subcommittee you just held a hearing on kind of AI as it relates to how it intersects with Fintech. Once Clarity gets passed, signed into law, which hopefully is this year. The next year of your chairmanship, what do you think? Is it going to be AI, or is it going to be cleanup on anything that we need to do with these two bills, or where does the subcommittee go?
I think we'll be looking at a lot of things. One is post-Chevron doctrine, right, as that gets ripped out by the United States Supreme Court, puts a lot of power as a conservative correctly back in the hands of Congress, so congressional intent is a driver. And so as we are now pushing the CFTC as well as the SEC to begin this regulatory rulemaking process, we can actually provide unique and substantive oversight of that from a subcommittee standpoint. So that's one, is to be far more engaged in the rulemaking process, both from a speed standpoint and to match congressional intent. The other is we began the process of digging into AI. And one of the things I want to make sure we do is we don't overregulate in this space. Your comments on the internet, I think, were actually spot on of where we were now 30 years ago. And as we see AI coming online, in particular in the financial services space, we see a lot of companies very substantively and thoughtfully engaging in the space to the benefit of consumers. And that doesn't mean you couldn't hold a congressional hearing where somebody would point out something that went wrong or something that they don't care for. but it's to not put in place a regulatory framework that hinders it, but to also be looking at certain areas where there may need to be regulation, in particular the 50-state patchwork that's coming into the broader AI space is uniquely challenging, and we always have this tension between federalism and the Commerce Clause, and that's a natural tension. But one of the strengths of the United States is that we have one cohesive United States of America market, and that's going to be a really essential piece on the AI side.
So I serve on the AI kind of special subcommittee that was convened last year under Patrick McHenry and continued under Chairman Hill. And, you know, we had one day with housing, we had one day with banks, we had one day with regulators, and they kept asking us, well, how is Congress going to prepare to make sure that AI doesn't discriminate? And I listened to this for hours, and I finally said, wait a second, we have laws that prohibit discrimination. Don't shift the burden to the Congress to say, how are you going to protect us? When you discriminate and we determine that you're discriminating, you are going to pay a fine, you are going to be sanctioned, you are going to be regulated, and I don't care if your answer is, well, it was AI, it was in the algorithm, or it was in the model. I don't care. If you're discriminating against somebody because of their race, their creed, their sex, whatever it is, you're in trouble. So don't do it. And when we find out you're doing it, you are going to pay a price. And I finally started saying that, and people are like, yes, we don't need to have a whole new set of laws just because AI is out there. But we do have to make sure that our regulators have enough resources and that they are operating at the speed of business to ensure that we are protecting consumers. Okay, so you've been in Congress 7 years. You've had a great career so far. Talk about where you've come from as it relates to coming from Wisconsin 70 years ago, and where you're going, and the Financial Services Committee service that you've been doing.
So I served in the private sector. So when I ran in 2018, a Trump midterm, like we're going to have the second Trump midterm election coming up, I had never been in any form of elected office. So you say the last thing I ran for at all was 7th grade student council, and I won that year, so I was 1 for 1 going into the 18 election. And then I stopped. But I worked in the private sector. I worked for a large publicly traded company, did a lot of securities law work for them in merger and acquisition, and then I worked for a large plastics manufacturing company that was private equity backed. And as the seat became open, what I would watch is we were trying to expand and grow the company. If anybody's ever worked in the private equity space, it's the speed of light that the ownership is trying to move that company, which can be really fun if things are going well. But you would then run into roadblocks from regulatory. I mean, you would just want to pound your head against a brick wall and say, I'm literally trying to build an operation here and hire 500 people at family-sustaining jobs, and you're literally trying to slow me down. And then you come into Congress, and you try to address the regulatory state, address the financial structure of the United States, but leverage some of the knowledge that you have of how do you actually get things done. And I think that's a little bit more of a business mindset than a pure policy mindset, that sometimes our colleagues want to have the fight rather than reach the end result. And so if you think about genius getting all the way across, or clarity, which we did get across the House, and I do believe we'll get it all the way signed into law, it's more than just being up and standing on your principles. It's actually finally getting the deal done. So that's kind of my private equity background. And then the work that I do on the administration committee, which picks up federal election law, which the president's uniquely interested in, if you didn't know. So I get some phone calls on that on occasion. But then also on the member security side and some of the operations, kind of the guts of how the House works, has allowed me to build relationships with people across the conference, both in a sense, Democrat and Republican, which when we were moving that bill through, on the genius side, became really important, because we had kind of a kerfluffle of people on the home stretch that wanted to block the rule. This is kind of inside baseball in D.C., and navigating and negotiating with those people involved a meeting in the West Wing, in the Oval Office with President Trump, and it was kind of an unbelievable process to get it all the way across the line. But as you know, we have an incredibly narrow majority. We have a 3-seat majority. At any given time can take to put the train off the rails. And so this is just a constant blocking and tackling motion to make sure that we're moving this agenda forward because we have such an opportunity where the House, the Senate, and the administration are aligned.
So let's talk about your district. So you're like the southeastern corner of Wisconsin. You have Kenosha, Wisconsin, just north of Chicago. But where does your district all go?
Yeah, so I jumped on a flight out of O'Hare. It was an hour 19 to O'Hare today. I maybe went a little quick. But the district is that southeast corner of Wisconsin. The bulk of the population actually sits north of the state line, north of Chicago, up to the southern suburbs of Milwaukee. And so it's been redrawn in the last redistricting, making it one of the most competitive districts in the United States. So if you took all the districts represented by Republicans in the United States of America, I have the 10th most competitive district held by a Republican. And so a lot of that, the way you politically navigate that, and the state of Wisconsin is a perennial swing state, which means on any given day, there's somebody campaigning in your district for or against you. There are paid people knocking doors for and against me by outside groups today. There's TV ads saying Bryan's not a good guy up today. And we're like over a year to the election. And so that's just kind of par for the course. You live in that political environment.
And how much did you spend last cycle on your election, and how much did your opponent spend to try and defeat you?
Yeah, it's probably about $10 million. My first race, they spent $8.9 million against me. I ran against the second most funded Democrat in the United States of America. I don't recommend it. And so that was my first run. And so that was kind of like, here we go. Welcome to the rodeo, baptism by fire. And then last cycle, going into Labor Day of the election year, I was the most spent against Republican in the House of Representatives up to that point. So I think they ran 7 or 8 negative TV ads against me by the time we get to Labor Day. And we didn't respond because I don't have the resources to do it. And my strategy was to hold fire till the end. We came out on the backside of Labor Day and campaigned pretty aggressively. But I really view it as this is like a job interview. And if you have a job interview every 2 years for your own job, the best thing you can do is just do your job. And so I view that I did a lot of management and had a lot of people working under us and a lot of companies that we would work with, that we would acquire when we would do these acquisitions. And you'd have some people that try to position and try to finagle and they try to move, and you kind of watch them the whole time. Then you have other people that would do their job, and then when you'd look for the promotion, I always thought the person that did their current job really well was the person I wanted to promote. I want my same job, I don't want a promotion. But in that context, right, if you just go out and do your job, I mean, the town hall that I did in Wisconsin, we talked on the phone because I did a town hall about 5 days before Mike did down here. And I walked out, I've done dozens and dozens of these. I walked out, wasn't exactly sure what it would be in the room, and there's 400 or 500 people, kind of aggressive boos. And I opened my town hall like I opened all of them. I said, we live in the greatest country in the world, which gives us an opportunity to have a dialogue with our elected leaders. And I like to begin all my town halls with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would, please stand. Boo. And you were going,
that's a bad sign.
Oh, wow. Like, we're booing the Pledge of Allegiance. An individual took a knee. Somebody did a Nazi salute. You went, this is wild. And then it just got louder and a little bit wilder from there. But that wasn't everybody in the room. That was a select group of pretty extreme protesters. And also, I mean, there's Democrats in Wisconsin. There's Democrats in Nebraska. Normal Democrats, normal people don't boo the Pledge of Allegiance. And so this kind of just gives you a flavor of some of the folks that were there. But there's also other people in the room that wanted to hear you.
Sure.
That were actually there for the right reasons. They may or may not agree with me on any given issue. That's totally fine. You don't have to agree. But you got to have that type of engagement. And that's true across the board for like U.S. political discourse, is to make sure that we're having that type of political engagement, whether or not it's in the financial services space or whether or not it's in tax policy or foreign affairs.
Yeah, I would say the people that are the loudest at a town hall, they're the fringe in either party. Both parties have them. America has them, and they love to be upset. And they are at their best when they're angry. But a vast majority of Nebraska, people want to ask you a question, and they want an answer. And I think that what worries me, and I try to help encourage people to run for the legislature, and by the way, we have a number of state senators here. And I really got a wake-up call when those 2 state senators in Minnesota were assassinated. That was jarring, because I'm in the process of trying to encourage somebody I really like to be a state senator, and to serve in our unicameral. It's getting harder for me to convince people that this is a worthwhile public service endeavor. I don't care who you are, what your party is, whatnot. People don't want to get crossways with you. They don't want to have stuff said about them on the internet. I remember when I was first in the legislature back in 2004, somebody, if they'd write a letter to the editor that was bad about me in the Norfolk paper, I would have lost 2 days of sleep. I would have been upset. I told one of my colleagues the other day, I got 800 calls calling me a pedophile protector, and it didn't even faze me. And I don't know if that's healthy or not, right? And you know what? And there are Democrats that are in tight seats too that are doing the same thing he's doing. And by the way, people don't realize this, but we can go to lunch with them. We can be on trips with them. We can work with them. And for me, I think about Emmanuel Cleaver from Kansas City. I'm working on a major housing bill right now. First time in 12 years, the House and the Senate will pass bills on housing. And Mr. Cleaver and I have been working in a bipartisan way since January. And the Missouri legislature is doing what a lot of legislatures are doing, and they are redistricting him out of Congress. It's going to be a loss if he's not there. He's a good guy. He is somebody that served for a long time in the House, and yet he comes to work every day, and he sits down with a smile, and he works with me on my bill. I just think that shows a lot of class from somebody that's in a pretty stressful situation, and he's given a lot of his career to the House of Representatives. While he's being targeted, he's chipper and nice, and he's focused on the issues. And he's not thinking about retribution. He knows that I care about the policy, he cares about the policy, and he can separate it. And we need more people that can separate the election side from the governing side. And so with that, we're kind of coming down on time here. One of the issues you care quite a bit about is the budget. Yeah. You have been focused in on our federal spending, how it works, the mandatory spending, the discretionary spending. Obviously, we went through the first part of the year with DOGE. Where do you think we're at with our budget, and where do we need to go as a country to deal with this issue?
I'd love to put up a pie chart, which is what I do in all my town halls. Going to bore everybody here, but it's so important to actually break down where are we spending money. And I feel like a lot of times the way that we are culturally approaching the spending paradigm that we're in is if you went to a hotel, since I checked in across the street, and you came in and you talked to the owner of the hotel, and they said, man, we are going bankrupt, everything's going sideways. And you say, what did you do? And he'd say, we built a commission to figure out and to stop people from stealing towels. And you'd say, well, that's a great idea. People shouldn't steal towels. That is not why your hotel is about to go bankrupt, right? There's something far more important structurally that's going on. And so, yes, we should be worried about waste, fraud, and abuse, 100%. You shouldn't steal towels at the hotel. There's no place for it. But also, we have to look as to where the bulk of our spending is. 75% of federal spending is on autopilot, many of which are absolutely essential programs, Medicare, Social Security, et cetera. And we spend a lot of our time on about 12.5% of our spending, which is the discretionary piece of the pie, right? National defense is the other 12.5%. That's not on autopilot. I think we should plus that up. We could have a long conversation. But to have a productive conversation on the broader entitlement programs and social welfare that we've structured as a country in an environment where we're not putting in place enough policies to create a high growth environment is long-term problematic. And so the challenge with this is we saw when we passed the one big beautiful bill, OBBB, or whatever we call it today, that when we put in place effectively work requirements inside Medicaid with structural savings that as you compare it to the size of the national debt and deficit are reasonably small. The vitriol that came back from that and the lack of engagement on productive dialogue is really concerning. And that is going to be a long-term challenge that we face is until we talk about the welfare structure that we have set up as a country, what the cost outlay, what the cash outlay is for that, and what our growth rate is long-term, we're not gonna be well positioned. And so my biggest fear, you talked about the importance of having the United States dollar as a world reserve currency. It's absolutely true. But my biggest concern is we find ourselves in a long-term inflationary environment because of the spending profile that we're in. You said the good news was early and it was like the bad news. Now we got to the bad news. No, but in a serious sense, this is going to take a cultural shift broader than any given political party to recognize where we're at and how we unwind this. In the fight that we're about to have on your TV over the course of the next 9 days is going to be aggressively about 25% of total federal spending. Again, really important to work on that area, but not where we're seeing the growth in the drivers of federal spending.
Well said. Taylor, how are we doing on time?
For a few questions.
Okay. Before we get to the questions, I got to put my pitch in. I'm going to be consistent from this morning. The entire reason that I host this event is to expose students at this university to the opportunities in Fintech that are available in Lincoln and Omaha and Nebraska. The second reason I host this event is to bring in people from across the United States to sit in that room and look at our best assets, asking questions, dressed up in a suit, and impressing everybody in the room with their interest in digital assets. If you are outside of Nebraska and you have a hand in deciding where your next business goes, take advantage of our best natural resource, and they are the students at the University of Nebraska. With that, Taylor, you are recognized.
We have a couple microphones. If you want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand, and either Carter or I will come to you.
This is certainly not like my town hall. And actually, I think I built a good rapport up with a lot of the folks that were protesting. I laugh a little bit about that, but I think it's actually true. I think the fact that none of them showed up today is the sign of respect. You know, I did 3 town halls, and they knew today was about growing Nebraska and not an opportunity to get upset about the latest bill. But, you know, when you do show up in the town square, you get to have events like this, and you're engaging with your community. So, anybody have a question? Well, everybody agrees with everything we've said. Bryan, we got one over here, yeah.
Go ahead.
I just dropped the mic. So
Tell everybody who you are.
So Mike DeVere, CEO of STI. Thank you, Congressman Flood, for putting on this event. Second time here. Oddly, I'm sitting next to the Chamber of Commerce for Lincoln. So
Pure coincidence.
I wonder why that happened. We're looking for a new home. I know, exactly. So thank you so much. Just love to hear more on tech neutrality. So you were talking about regulations and this idea of discrimination. It's against the law.
Right.
But every time I feel like I'm in D.C., I'm revisiting what new regulations do we need to manage AI, and I keep on saying, well, we already have regulations. Actually, we need it to be consistently played with the existing industry score players as well as the AI companies. So just love to hear your thoughts as well as Congressman Steil.
My biggest interest from a regulator standpoint when we look at oversight of the regulators is, are we paying the people that are in our agencies enough to compete somewhat close with the business community? Now, a lot of people get into the SEC or the FBI or the CFTC because they have a sense of public service and duty, which we wholly exploit as Americans, and we take their goodness and we say thank you. And the other part of it is we can't leave them in the dust with their pay. And as our major corporations build AI infrastructure, our regulators have to be able to have the resources to be able to prove in a court of law that, yes, in fact, this industry player is violating the law in this way. And we have to be able to prove it in such a way that all of that industry's peers fear the same experience from their government, which is there to protect the people, the consumers. And so for me, it's a resource issue at a time when it's hard to come up with resources. But if we want to protect people, we're going to have to pay people in the federal government, and we're going to have to get them the best. You know, if I were at the FDIC and I was running that agency, I would park at MIT, and I would be talking to MIT students, and I'd be looking at ways, and it may be that the banks ultimately get assessed, for some of this. And that's unfortunately the way things work. But we have to have the best in the business. If we're going to protect our financial system, for me, it's investing in the people that enforce the regulations. And if we have to pass a law because there's something unforeseen, then absolutely. But we have a pretty safe structure system, I think.
Congress is built to be reactive, not proactive. But also my concern is that there are ideas out there that'll throttle that innovation development in the United States. I would say that the one piece of conversation that is worthy of us having is how do we prevent the 50-state patchwork from bogging down innovation development inside the United States and effectively allow, as we did in other areas, California or New York to put forward a state law that by effect becomes a national law. And that's where a lot of the time and energy in this discussion amongst, I think, the more productive folks has been.
Anybody else?
Sorry, I got a mic. Hopefully I'm not cutting in line here. I don't really have much of a question for you, but I'm a student, and I just want to say thank you for inviting students to an event like this. I think this is amazing, and I'm a brand new student to UNL, brand new to Nebraska. In my last school, I'll tell you, they didn't give us opportunities to come and learn from people like you. So I just wanted to say thank you.
What state did you come from?
New Mexico.
Okay,
yeah, so I'm far from home. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah.
Well, after I heard your question today, someday we're all going to be working for you. So we appreciate you being here.
What was that?
We appreciate you, and we never want you to leave this state.
Thank you very much. I also want to say, as a future auditor, thank you for saying that about the regulations, because I think we already have too many regulations as it is in some aspects, and just make repetitive regulations for AI is a bit too much. So I really like your viewpoint on that.
Good.
Thank you.
We got one over here.
Down here.
Thinking about the budget, and now that we're spending more on interest than
Before we start, tell us about you.
Okay, my name's Casey Kirkshank. I'm the Director of Education at the Nebraska Bitcoin Association. So we're looking at innovative ways to think about, right, our deficits, our debt, those types of things. And so something that we're looking at is interest payments, and we're outspending defense right now with interest payments. Thoughts on the Federal Reserve and maintaining its independence, or might we need to rethink monetary policy and fiscal policy and maybe merge those together like we did in the 40s?
Okay, either way I can do it.
You go, Hassan.
So Fed independence is important, but I don't think that we should confuse Fed independence with freedom from criticism. And so I think what we're watching is the Fed being criticized for policy plays that are not in line with the administration. That's fair game. And if you go back and you listen to the Nixon tapes, I mean, this has played out time and time and time again over different political or different administrations. The difference is this is playing out just more publicly. So the argument against it is you would rather have this behind closed doors. I don't know that you would. I think that actually having the public debate and dialogue over it is actually a productive thing for us to do as a country. But the Fed being independent is important, but they're going to be they are open to criticism, and I've criticized Chairman Powell when he was before us when we were talking early on when there was an argument that inflation was temporary and transitory, that it wasn't sticky and stubborn, which we've now have realized it is. And you can go back and watch him come and testify before the House twice a year or the Senate twice a year on our respective committees. But as you step back on the broader interest, you're exactly right. When you fully bake in the interest cost, 1%, a 1% movement in interest rates is $370 billion per year into perpetuity. And so what we're watching is as U.S. Treasuries continually get renewed at the higher interest rate, interest payments are now about to eclipse $1 trillion. And if we go back and talk about the importance of stablecoin, one of the fastest increase in acquisition of U.S. Treasuries is U.S. dollar-backed stablecoins. And so that is one of our opportunities to actually keep interest rates down by increasing demand for U.S. Treasuries. And I think one of the long-term benefits that we will recognize years into the future of the way that we structured Genius and stablecoins is that we will have a global demand for U.S. Treasuries that will ultimately be utilized at the consumer level.
The only thing I would add is that when I listed all the things that make our American financial system great, I should have put in there an independent central bank. I think it is part of our sweet spot that makes us so successful, and we need to protect its independence. I went on a congressional trip. I was in Greece last year, and I spent a long time talking with a lot of people over there about the collapse of their economy, 12 15 years ago, and they went through a period of austerity that they're just now coming out of. And I think there's going to be an experience like that, probably in my lifetime, that we as Americans are going to go through. And I asked 1,000 questions about what it was like during the 10 years of austerity. And what was the mood like? Were people depressed? Like, were people committing suicide? Like, how did people in this country deal with it? And the one thing that gave me some hope is he said, we are a much better nation now because of it. We appreciate the things now that we have, that we've earned, and our balance sheets are healthy, and people are now investing in our country. I hope to God none of us ever have to do that. There's ways around that if we make the right decisions. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because essentially everything has to get trued up at the end of the day. And it makes me want to read more about how Greece dealt with that 10 years of pain and how they sacrificed. And I said one time earlier this year, getting through our federal budget issues is going to it will require some sacrifice. And you would have thought I had violated one of the 3 rails of politics. Americans don't want to talk about sacrifice. We have been in an abundant mode for so long. The idea of not getting something that's been sold to you by the politician you voted for and have it being taken away is not acceptable to people in both parties. And so we're going to have to do something. And I know about sacrifice because I was in the legislature when I had to go cut $1 billion out of the budget. And I had to go into the rotunda and look in the eyes of a mother who has a developmentally disabled son and say, we can't afford respite care this year because we're out of money. And she says, well, you're going to put more money in the troopers, judges, and teachers' retirement. And I said, yes, I have to, because it's a contract with those employees. Well, why are you shutting down this service over here? And I'm in the rotunda. And what started happening was I got to be so good at it that my colleagues in the legislature would be like, I can't possibly go tell Maxine that we're cutting her tax credit. And I'd be like, is this the difference between you voting for it or not? And they'd say yes. I'd say, okay, I'll go tell Maxine. So I did this for an entire session. I had those conversations in the rotunda. And those are the kind of conversations that are someday going to happen. And too many lawmakers live in a world where they've never had to do it. And even when we had to do it in Nebraska, good people that I worked with begged me to go out in the rotunda and deliver the message. I think about state troopers all the time. They have to go sometimes knock on someone's door at 1 a.m. and tell a family that their son died in a car accident. There's no easy way around it. This is the same thing that your government has to do. Boy, this has really gotten dark. Zest AI needs to move to Lincoln, by the way. How are we doing on time, Taylor?
That's all the time we have for this chat, but if we can transition back to the auditorium, we'll start our next panel in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Before you walk out, can I just tell you guys, for the people that are from Nebraska, what an absolute rock star you have in Mike Flood.
Oh, thank you.
I get to offer this. You've been in office since?
3 years.
3 years. 3 years. He chairs one of the most important subcommittees on the Financial Services Committee, which means there's recognition amongst his peers on the committee. There's also a group of members, about 100 of us, about half the conference that serve on a conference where we meet once a week called Main Street. It is practical, real-world conservatives that are actually trying to get things done, which means you're elected by your peers. The chairman of the Main Street Caucus is Mike Flood. So it's a recognition of his peers of what quality and acumen and thought he brings to the table. And so I just didn't want to leave here without saying that you guys should recognize amongst all 435 members of the House, and we got some characters, there's also some spectacular members, and Mike Flood is absolutely one of the best.
Well, thank you very much.